Harold Vance looked at Edna Mae Kessler's root cellar and said, "Mrs. Kessler, this isn't food safety. This is poverty with a door on it." The men behind him laughed. By noon the next day, every safe lunch tray at Briar Hollow Elementary would be pulled from the cafeteria line. Edna stood outside the abandoned community kitchen in her faded blue coat, one hand resting on the old iron latch. She was 78, small, quiet, and easy for the county men to overlook. Behind that door sat the root cellar her mother had once treated like a living thing: stone, shelves, cold mountain air, and a brass key Edna had carried for 26 years. Harold held up the notice. Moisture, stone dust, no approved ventilation, no digital temperature control. Her son Calvin stood near the delivery truck, begging her with his eyes not to make trouble. The school had a new meal company now. Refrigerated vans, printed labels, clean uniforms. Nobody wanted an old woman talking about jars, potatoes, and mountain cold. Edna did not raise her voice. She only looked toward the school, where children were already waiting for lunch. What nobody knew was that the cellar held more than food. Behind one stone wall was a record the district had buried for nearly 50 years: names, meals, signatures, and a choice Edna's mother had taken to her grave. And when the county tried to seal that door shut, what truth would come breathing out of the dark? If stories about forgotten people, old promises, and the quiet things a town almost throws away still mean something to you, consider subscribing. Because what happened in Briar Hollow was not just about a cellar, a school lunch, or one stubborn old woman. It was about the truth waiting beneath a locked door. The first county truck arrived behind Briar Hollow Community Kitchen at 8:17 on a gray Thursday morning. The clouds sat low over the ridge. The blacktop behind the old kitchen still held last night's rain in shallow silver puddles. A few parents crossed the lot toward the elementary school next door, carrying backpacks, coffee cups, and the tired patience of another school morning. Edna Mae Kessler was already there. She stood beside the cellar door with a brass key folded inside her palm. The door was set into the earth behind the kitchen, half hidden by wet grass and a low fieldstone wall. Its wood had gone dark with age. The iron latch was black from decades of hands. To most people, it looked like the entrance to something best forgotten. To Edna, it looked like her mother's handprint. Harold Vance stepped out of the county truck, wearing polished boots and a tan jacket with the health department seal stitched over the pocket. Two younger county employees followed him, carrying a clipboard, yellow tape, and a steel hasp. Behind them came a woman from the local paper. "Mrs. Kessler," Harold said, glancing at the cellar door, "we're here to post final notice." Edna looked at the paper in his hand. Unsafe storage area. Non-compliant structure. Potential contamination risk. Scheduled for closure, pending inspection and remediation. Words like that had a way of making a thing sound guilty before anybody listened. Harold nailed the notice to the door with 3 sharp strikes. The sound carried across the wet parking lot. A few parents slowed. A custodian from the school stood near the dumpsters and watched. Then Harold turned toward the small gathering and gave the kind of smile people use when they want an audience. "This cellar has no place in a modern school food program," he said. "We have certified suppliers now. We have cold chain records. We have safety standards that don't depend on an old door in a hillside." One of the county men chuckled. Edna kept her eyes on the notice. Harold went on. "The district can't have people believing jars on stone shelves are a substitute for refrigeration. That may have been how things were done when folks had no better choice, but this isn't 1978. The year hit Edna harder than the insult. She looked up. Harold noticed, and mistook it for weakness. "Mrs. Kessler," he said, louder now, "this isn't food safety. This is poverty with a door on it." The laugh that followed was not large. It did not need to be. A few short bursts from the county men. One awkward laugh from a parent who looked away too late. The newspaper woman lowered her camera, as if even she was not sure whether to capture an old woman being made small in front of a school. Across the lot, a white box truck rolled toward the cafeteria entrance. Blue letters on its side read Blue Ridge Meal Works. Below that, in smaller print, "Fresh meals, safe systems, better schools." The driver's door opened. Calvin Kessler climbed down. Edna's son wore a company vest over his flannel shirt. When he saw his mother by the cellar and Harold with the notice, his mouth tightened. "Mom," Calvin said, walking over quickly, "please don't do this today." "I'm not doing anything," Edna said. You're standing in front of a closure order. I'm standing where I said I'd stand. Calvin glanced at the parents watching from the edge of the lot. His voice dropped, but the shame in it did not. Blue Ridge already called me once about this. They think I'm feeding you complaints. If this turns into a scene, I could lose my route. That hurt more than Harold's words. Edna knew Calvin needed that job. His mortgage was 2 months behind. A mother did not stop knowing those things just because her son was grown. Harold folded his clipboard against his chest. You have until 8 tomorrow morning to surrender the key, he said. If you refuse, the county will cut the lock and seal the entrance. Permanently. Edna opened her palm. The brass key lay there, dull and warm from her skin. For a moment, she was 12 again, standing beside Ruby Kessler in the cellar while her mother counted jars by lantern light. Beans on the left, applesauce on the middle shelf, potatoes low, where the stone stayed coldest. A cellar is not just where you keep food, Ruby had said. It is where you keep tomorrow from going hungry. The school bell rang across the lot. Edna looked toward the cafeteria windows, where children were beginning to line up inside. Then she closed her fingers around the key. I'll be here at 8, she said. Harold smiled, thinking he had won. But Edna was not promising to surrender the key. She was promising to bring the truth with her. Long before anyone in Briar Hollow used the words cold chain or certified supplier, there was Ruby Kessler's root cellar. Edna first remembered it by smell: damp limestone, burlap sacks, apple peels drying in a bowl, earth after rain. Her mother's apron, always carrying flour in the seams no matter how many times it was washed. Ruby Kessler was not the head cook at Briar Hollow Elementary. Not officially. The district never gave her a title that sounded important. On paper, she was part-time kitchen help, paid only for the hours someone in an office decided were necessary. But every child who came through that cafeteria in the hard years knew Ruby's hands. She arrived before sunrise, when the school windows were still black and the ridge above town was only a darker shape against the sky. She unlocked the side door, tied her apron, filled the big dented pots, and walked down into the root cellar with a lantern swinging from one hand. Edna used to follow her. At 8 years old, she thought the cellar was magic. At 12, she thought it was embarrassing. The other children had fathers who worked at the mill, the post office, the county garage. They had mothers who wore clean dresses to church and brought casseroles to events with little paper flags stuck in the top. Edna's mother smelled like onions, dish soap, and cold potatoes. Her hands were always rough. Her shoes were always damp at the edges. When Edna was small, she loved sitting on the cellar steps while Ruby counted jars. Beans on the left, Ruby would say. Applesauce, where the air moves. Potatoes low, where the stone holds cold longest. Ruby never wrote those rules down. She carried them in her body. She knew which corner sweated before rain. She knew which shelf could hold milk for a few hours longer. She knew when cabbage was turning before it showed itself, and when a jar lid had failed by the tiny change in sound it made under her fingernail. To Edna, as a child, that knowledge felt like a kind of power. Then she got old enough to hear how people talked. At school assemblies, the superintendent thanked donors, teachers, board members, delivery companies, visiting officials. He thanked the cafeteria staff, the way people thanked the floor for being there. Once, during a Thanksgiving lunch, Ruby and 4 other women stood behind the serving line while the principal announced that the school was proud of its efficient new lunch program. Efficient. Edna remembered that word because her mother had been up since 4 that morning peeling sweet potatoes with a knife whose handle was wrapped in tape. Nobody said Ruby's name. That was the year Edna began walking a little ahead of her mother in public. She hated herself for it now. But at 13, shame was louder than gratitude. She hated the hairnet Ruby wore. She hated the way the cafeteria steam clung to her mother's coat. She hated children saying, "Your mama gave me extra beans," as if that made Ruby generous and Edna poor at the same time. Ruby never scolded her for it. She only watched Edna with quiet eyes and let her grow into the kind of girl who wanted away from Briar Hollow as fast as a bus could carry her. After high school, Edna left for Charleston to work in a pharmacy stockroom. She told people her mother worked for the school district. She did not say kitchen. She did not say cellar. She did not say that some winters Ruby brought home bruised apples and cut the bad spots out so nothing would be wasted. For years, Edna visited only on holidays. Each time she came back, the root cellar seemed smaller. The kitchen seemed older. Her mother seemed more tired. But Ruby still kept the brass key on a string inside her dress, still checked the stone shelves, still brushed dust from the little pencil marks along the wood. Those marks bothered Edna. They were not dates exactly, not measurements. Some were numbers, some were initials, some were only short lines, grouped in fives. When Edna once asked what they meant, Ruby placed her hand over the shelf and said, "Lunch counts." "That's all?" Ruby looked toward the cellar wall before answering. "That's enough." There were things Ruby did not explain. A box she kept high above the back shelf. A loose stone on the north wall she told Edna never to touch. A winter she never spoke of except to say, "Some years teach a town what it owes." Edna did not ask. She was busy building a life that did not smell like onions and damp stone. By the time she came home for good, Ruby was already shrinking into herself. The old community kitchen had closed. The school had expanded. The district had built a bright cafeteria with stainless counters and a walk-in cooler that hummed all night. People said it was progress, and maybe it was. Children no longer stood in line with patched elbows and empty pockets the way they had in Ruby's day. But Ruby still worried about the cellar. Even from her bed, she asked whether the door was locked, whether the vent stones were clear, whether the shelves had warped, whether anyone from the county had been poking around. Edna thought it was the fear of an old woman losing her past. One evening in late October, when the maples outside Ruby's window had gone red and thin, Ruby called Edna close. Her hands were light by then, almost weightless under the blanket. But when she pressed the brass key into Edna's palm, her fingers tightened with the strength of someone handing over more than metal. "Don't let them seal it shut," Ruby whispered. Edna bent closer. "The cellar?" Ruby's eyes moved toward the window, toward the school roof beyond the trees. "The door," she said. "The names." Edna did not understand. She thought grief was making the words come loose from each other. She thought Ruby was remembering some old lunch list, some forgotten winter, some kitchen trouble that no longer mattered. A week later, Ruby died. At the funeral, people said she had fed half the town. They said she had been a good woman. They said she never asked for much. They said all the easy things people say when the dead can no longer correct them. No one from the district mentioned pension credit. No one mentioned unpaid hours. No one mentioned 1,978. Edna stood beside the grave with the brass key in her coat pocket and felt something she was ashamed to name. Not only grief. Not only love. Guilt. Because she had spent half her life trying not to become Ruby Kessler. And now, the only thing Ruby had asked of her was to guard the very place Edna had once wanted to forget. For 26 years, she did. She swept the cellar steps, cleared the vents, replaced the latch twice, fought mildew, mice, vandals, and memory. She told herself she was preserving her mother's kitchen because that was easier than admitting she was preserving a question. What names? Why the door? And why had Ruby looked afraid, not of death, but of someone sealing the truth away before Edna finally learned how to read it? The root cellar did not look like something that could save anything. That was part of the trouble. It had no stainless steel door, no humming compressor, no blinking temperature display mounted on a wall, no company logo, no laminated safety chart. From the outside, it was only a dark wooden door pressed into a slope behind an abandoned kitchen, with fieldstone rising around it like the town itself had tried to bury the entrance and failed. Inside, the air changed before the eyes adjusted. It was always cooler than people expected. Not cold like a machine, cold like shade under rock, cold like creek water under moss, the kind of cold that did not announce itself, but settled quietly against the skin and stayed there. Edna knew every inch of it. The first 3 steps were uneven, because the left side had sunk after the flood of 1,962. The 4th step sounded hollow if you put your weight too far back. The ceiling dipped near the middle, low enough that taller men always struck their heads if they came in proud. The east wall held the morning damp. The west wall stayed dry enough for onions. The north wall, the one Ruby had told her never to touch, held a different kind of cold altogether. That was where the stone shelves began. They had been built long before Edna was born, cut from local limestone and fitted without beauty but with patience. The shelves were wide enough for jars, shallow baskets, crocks, crates, and the long wooden trays Ruby used for apples. Each shelf had marks along its edge. Some were knife cuts. Some were pencil lines. Some were initials, faded so pale they looked like scratches left by mice. To Harold Vance, those marks were contamination risks. He said so that afternoon when he returned with a digital moisture reader and 2 more photographs for his report. "Look at this," he told Edna, tapping the edge of a shelf with his pen. "Porous stone, unsealed wood, unknown residue. You can't document any of this." Edna stood at the foot of the steps with her hands folded. "I can document temperature. Not to code. I can document what stayed good here for 70 years. Harold gave a tired little laugh. Anecdotes are not compliance. Behind him, one of the younger county men took pictures. Flash against stone. Flash against shelves. Flash against the old vent shaft Ruby used to clear twice a year with a broom handle and a strip of cloth. Edna watched him photograph everything except the way the place worked. He did not photograph the narrow slit vent facing the ridge, angled so wind passed over it instead of straight through. He did not photograph the shallow floor channel that carried extra moisture toward a gravel pocket near the drain. He did not photograph the shelf heights, different by only a few inches, each one meant for a different kind of food. He saw age. Edna saw design. That evening, after Harold left, she brought down 2 thermometers. One was new, bought from the hardware store with numbers large enough for her eyes. The other had belonged to Ruby, a glass tube in a metal sleeve, scratched at 40 degrees by years of use. Edna set the new one on the middle shelf. She hung Ruby's from a nail near the north wall. Then she sat on an overturned crate and waited. The town above her kept moving. A truck backed up behind the school. Children shouted somewhere beyond the fence. A dog barked twice and stopped. From the kitchen overhead came the small creaks of an empty building cooling as the sun went down. The thermometers settled within 1 degree of each other. Edna wrote the numbers in a small notebook. Outside temperature, 64. Cellar middle shelf, 40. 3. North wall, 39. She stared at that last number. The north wall had always been colder. Ruby had known it. Edna had known it. But seeing the number made the difference feel less like memory and more like evidence. She moved closer. The stone Ruby had forbidden her to touch sat low in the wall, just above the second shelf. It was not large, about the width of a dinner plate, darker around the edges, with a faint crescent mark near the bottom. Edna ran her fingers over it once and felt the old childhood warning rise in her body. "Leave that be." Ruby's voice was so clear that Edna pulled her hand back. The next morning, Calvin came by before his route. He found her outside the cellar with her notebook, a basket of apples, 3 jars of green beans, 2 potatoes, and a carton of milk she had bought herself from Carter's Market. "What is this?" he asked. "A comparison." "Mum, I'm not serving anything. I'm measuring." Calvin rubbed both hands over his face. He looked tired in a way that made him seem younger and older at once. "Blue Ridge has logs for all of this. Blue Ridge has trucks. And jobs," he said, "including mine." Edna looked down at the carton of milk. For a moment, she almost closed the notebook. Then she remembered Ruby standing in this same doorway, counting jars while the school upstairs pretended meals appeared because administrators approved them. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Edna said. "You don't have to try," Calvin answered. "Sometimes you just keep pulling on a thread until somebody else's coat comes apart." He regretted it as soon as he said it. She saw that in his face. But the words stayed between them. By noon, the first small sign arrived. June Mallory, the principal at Briar Hollow Elementary, came through the back gate carrying a clipboard against her chest. She was in her 40s, practical, careful, the kind of woman who never stepped into a fight until she knew where the floor was. "Mrs. Kessler," June said, "I need to ask you something unofficially." "Then ask it quietly." June glanced toward the school. "If a refrigerated truck lost temperature for 40 minutes, but the company log corrected afterward, would you trust everything inside?" Edna did not answer right away. "What was in it?" "Milk. Fruit cups. Chicken salad trays for tomorrow. How warm did it get?" June lowered her voice. "That's the problem. Their log says 43. One cafeteria aide saw 50. One before the display reset." Edna looked toward the root cellar door. "That is not the same thing." "I know. Does Harold know?" June's jaw tightened. "Harold approved their process last month." There it was. Not proof, not yet, but a crack in the bright wall of certainty everyone had built around the new system. Edna picked up the basket of apples and opened the cellar. June followed her down. At the bottom, She stopped breathing for a moment, the way people always did when the old cold touched them. Edna placed the apples on the west shelf, the beans lower, the potatoes near the floor. Then she held the carton of milk near the north wall and watched June notice the temperature. "How is it colder here?" June asked. Stone remembers what machines forget. June looked at her, not smiling. For the first time, someone from the school did not look at the cellar as poverty. She looked at it as a question. Before they left, Edna saw something behind the milk carton. A thin corner of metal. She moved the carton aside and leaned closer. Tucked behind the edge of the forbidden stone was a strip of old tin, almost the same color as the wall. It had been hidden so carefully that only someone using the north shelf would see it. Edna slid one fingernail under the edge and pulled. The strip came loose with a soft scrape. 3 words had been scratched into it by a hand she knew as well as her own. Lunch count, winter 1978. Edna stood very still. Above them, in the school kitchen, children laughed as trays clattered into place. Below them, the cellar held its quiet. And for the first time in 26 years, Edna understood that her mother had not been counting jars. Ruby had been counting children. The school board meeting was held in the library, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little more tired than they were. Edna had not been inside that room in years. The shelves were newer now. The carpet was blue instead of brown. There were posters about reading levels, kindness weeks, and digital citizenship taped above the windows. But in the far corner, near the emergency exit, Edna could still see the old doorway that once led toward the kitchen hall. Ruby had carried trays through that doorway. No plaque said so. No photograph hung there. Nothing in the room remembered her, except Edna. She sat in the second row with a canvas bag on her lap. Inside were her notebook, Ruby's old thermometer, the new thermometer, 2 potatoes, 3 apples, a sealed jar of green beans, and the strip of tin marked lunch count winter 1978. Calvin sat 3 chairs away, not beside her. That small distance said more than anger would have. At the front table sat June Mallory, Harold Vance, 3 school board members, and Wes Pritchard from Blue Ridge Mealworks. Wes was broad-shouldered, smooth-faced, and dressed in a Navy Company jacket that looked expensive without trying. He had brought a laptop, a folder of printed charts, and the calm expression of a man who knew the room had already been trained to trust his kind of evidence. Harold spoke first. He clicked through photographs on the projector, the cellar door, the old latch, the stone shelves, a close-up of moisture along the east wall, another of a cobweb near the vent shaft. Each image looked worse when flattened on a screen. "This is not about nostalgia," Harold said. "This is about liability. We cannot allow informal food storage connected to a school property, especially a structure with unsealed stone, undocumented sanitation history, and no approved monitoring system." Edna looked down at her hands. The room murmured. A mother in the back whispered, "I didn't know it looked like that." It did not look like that, Edna wanted to say. Not really. A photograph could catch damp stone. It could not catch the way air moved, or how cold settled, or what 70 years of careful use meant. Wes stood next. "Blue Ridge Mealworks understands community attachment," he said, smiling gently in Edna's direction. "But children deserve modern safety. Our trucks are monitored, our trays are sealed, our staff is trained, and our system is certified." He said system, the way some men said scripture. Then he put up a chart with neat green lines showing temperature compliance. Calvin stared at the floor. June Mallory watched the chart but did not nod. When Edna's turn came, the board chairman almost skipped her. June cleared her throat softly and said, "Mrs. Kessler asked to present." Harold's mouth tightened. Edna stood with her canvas bag. For a moment, her knees reminded her of her age. Then she thought of Ruby walking into the kitchen before dawn with 50 pounds of potatoes waiting in a sink, and she straightened. "I'm asking for 72 hours, Edna said. "Not permission to serve from the cellar. Not permission to break rules. Just 72 hours before you seal it, so someone besides Mr. Vance can measure what it actually does." Wes smiled like he was sorry for her. "Mrs. Kessler," he said, "with respect, food safety is not a feeling." "No," Edna said. "It is not." She took out the 2 thermometers and placed them on the table. "This one is new. This one belonged to my mother. They read within 1 degree of each other yesterday. Outside was 64. Middle shelf was 43. North wall was 39. A board member leaned forward despite herself. Harold cut in. Unverified private measurements. Edna set the apples on the table. Then the potatoes. Then the jar of green beans. These were stored in the cellar overnight. I'm not asking you to eat them. I'm asking you to test them. A few people shifted. Someone in the back gave a little laugh. Then Wes looked at the jar and said, "With all due respect, this is exactly the problem. A few apples in a jar from an old cellar cannot replace a certified supply chain." The laugh grew larger that time. Edna opened her mouth, then closed it. She had promised herself she would not beg. So she reached into the bag and brought out the strip of tin. "This was behind the north wall," she said. "My mother scratched these words into it." Harold barely looked. "And what is that supposed to prove?" Edna held it up. "Lunch count winter 1978. The words meant nothing to most of the room. She could see that instantly. A strange old note. A piece of scrap. Another relic from a woman who had not learned when to let go. Calvin stood suddenly. "Mom," he said, voice strained. "Please." Every head turned toward him. He swallowed. "These people are trying to run a school. Blue Ridge is trying to feed kids. You're making it sound like everybody's against you, but maybe this is just an old place that needs to close." Silence followed. That was the sentence that reached Edna. Not Harold's insult. Not Wes's smile. Not the board's impatience. Her son had said it. An old place that needs to close. Edna folded the strip of tin into her palm. The board chairman cleared his throat and announced the decision before anyone had really debated it. The county closure would proceed. The cellar would be sealed the next morning at 8. No extension. No independent review. No further use connected to school property. June looked down. Wes closed his folder. Harold seemed satisfied. Edna gathered her apples, potatoes, jar, thermometers, and strip of tin. She did not look at Calvin as she passed him. If she had, she might have said something neither of them could carry home. Outside, the evening air had turned sharp. She walked back behind the kitchen alone. The cellar door waited in the slope, dark and still, with Harold's notice fluttering on it. At first, Edna thought the wind had loosened the paper. Then, she saw the fresh scratch near the lock. Not old rust, not weather. Someone had tried to force the latch. She knelt slowly, her heart beginning to beat in a different rhythm. There were marks around the keyhole, thin and bright, where metal had bitten metal. On the wet ground below the door lay a tiny curl of brass. Edna touched it with one finger. For 26 years, almost nobody in Briar Hollow had cared what was behind that door. Now the board had voted to seal it, and before the county could come back with a steel hasp, someone else had already tried to get in. Edna closed her hand around Ruby's key. For the first time that day, she was not embarrassed. She was afraid. The next morning, Edna woke before the alarm. For a moment, she lay still in the dark and listened to the house breathe around her. The refrigerator clicked on in the kitchen. A branch scraped once against the siding. Somewhere down the road, a truck engine turned over and faded toward town. 8 o'clock. That was when Harold Vance would come back with his steel hasp. Edna dressed slowly, buttoning her blue coat with stiff fingers. She put Ruby's key in her pocket, then took it out again and tied it to a piece of string, the way her mother used to wear it under her dress. It looked foolish over Edna's sweater, but she did not care. Before leaving, she opened the small drawer beside the stove and took out the strip of tin. Lunch count winter 1978. She had slept only 3 hours, and even then, she had dreamed of Ruby counting invisible children on stone shelves. At 7:35, Edna reached the community kitchen. The lock had not been touched again. That should have comforted her. It did not. She stood by the cellar door and waited for the county truck. The morning was pale and damp, with fog sitting low over the schoolyard. Children moved through it in little shapes, their backpacks bouncing, their voices muffled, as if the whole town had been covered in cloth. At 7:52, Harold's county truck turned into the lot. At 7:54, Calvin's Blue Ridge truck arrived behind the cafeteria. At 7:56, June Mallory came out the back door of the school without a coat. That was what Edna noticed first. June was not walking. She was hurrying. Harold stepped out of his truck with the steel hasp in one hand. "Mrs. Kessler," he said, "we can do this simply." June reached them before Edna could answer. "Harold," she said, breath short, "I need you inside." He frowned. We have a scheduled closure. I know what you have. I need you inside now." Something in her voice cut through his authority. Calvin was standing at the back of the Blue Ridge truck with another driver, both men looking at the open cargo doors. The refrigerated unit was humming, but not steadily. It pulsed in short, uneven bursts, like a person trying to catch breath after climbing stairs. Wes Pritchard was not there yet. That mattered too. "What happened?" Edna asked. June looked at Harold first, then at Edna, as if deciding which rule to break. "One of the cafeteria aides saw the truck display at 54 degrees when it came in," she said. "The driver says it was only for a few minutes. The company log says it corrected during delivery." Harold's face hardened. "Who touched the cargo?" "No one served anything." "Good. But the milk feels warm," June said. "The fruit cups are sweating, and the chicken salad trays." She stopped. Edna finished for her. "Smell sweet?" June nodded once. Harold turned sharply toward Calvin. "Was there a power interruption?" Calvin's jaw tightened. "The unit alarm flickered on Route 11. I reported it. To dispatch?" "Yes." "And dispatch cleared it?" Calvin looked at his mother, then away. "They said if the log normalized before arrival, we were within process." Edna heard the word process and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the cellar. Inside the cafeteria kitchen, the bright new world looked less certain than it had on Wes's charts. Sealed trays sat in stacks on stainless counters. Milk cartons filled gray crates. Plastic fruit cups fogged from the inside. The walk-in cooler hummed, but it was nearly empty because the district had switched to just-in-time delivery to save storage costs. Just in time. Ruby would have hated those words. They meant tomorrow was someone else's problem until the truck arrived. June closed the kitchen door behind them. "I have 217 students," she said. 41 qualify for full lunch assistance. Some of them don't bring anything from home. I need to know what I can save." Harold began opening cartons with gloved hands. "We follow protocol," he said. "If temperature abuse is suspected, we discard." "All of it?" June asked. "If we can't verify safety, yes." Calvin stood by the loading door, pale. Edna walked to the nearest crate and lifted one milk carton. She did not open it. She held it against the inside of her wrist. Then she turned it slowly and listened to the liquid move. Harold saw her. "Do not interfere with inspection." "I'm not inspecting." "Then what are you doing?" Remembering, he almost snapped back, but June said, "Let her look." That changed the room. Not much, but enough. Edna moved from crate to crate. Milk first, then fruit, then the chicken salad trays. She asked when the truck had been loaded how long the rear doors had stayed open at the previous stop, whether the trays were stacked near the unit vent or against the outer wall. Calvin answered quietly. The other driver said less. Edna separated 3 groups. "This goes," she said, pointing to the chicken salad. "No question." Harold gave a clipped nod, unwillingly agreeing. "These fruit cups need testing. Some may be safe, some not." "And the milk?" June asked. Edna looked at the crates. "Some are lost. Not all." Harold folded his arms. "You cannot determine that by touch." "No," Edna said. "But I can tell you what to test first." The room went still. It was not victory. It was only the first crack. June sent for the cafeteria aide who had seen the display. Harold called his office for test strips and documentation forms. Calvin stood near the door, looking as if each discarded tray was coming out of his paycheck. Then June turned to Edna. "If we lose today's lunch, can the cellar hold anything for tomorrow?" Harold objected immediately. "Absolutely not. I did not ask if we could serve from it," June said. "I asked if it can hold sealed replacement stock until we find emergency refrigeration." Edna looked at Harold, then at Calvin, then toward the back door that led across the wet lot to the old kitchen. "Yes," she said, "if we do it right." They moved only what could legally be held. Unopened dry goods from the school pantry, whole apples from a local farm delivery, sealed peanut butter, bread, and emergency shelf-stable cartons that had been sitting in a warm storage room near the boiler. Nothing risky, nothing cooked, nothing that would give Harold reason to shut the entire school kitchen down. Still, when Edna unlocked the cellar in front of them, Harold stood as if watching a crime. The old door opened. Cold air breathed out. June stepped inside behind Edna, carrying the first crate of apples. Calvin followed with a box of shelf-stable milk cartons, though he did not look at his mother. Harold came last, holding his clipboard like a shield. The Cellar received them without judgment. Edna worked quickly. Apples on the west shelf. Bread high and dry. Emergency cartons away from the damp wall. Peanut butter in the middle where the temperature did not swing. She showed June where air moved and where it stayed still. She made Calvin lift boxes off the floor and set them on slats so moisture would not crawl up from the stone. For 20 minutes, nobody laughed. Then Harold's digital thermometer beeped. He had placed the probe near the north wall. 39 degrees. He checked it again. The number did not change. June saw his face before he could hide it. "So it holds," she said. Harold removed the probe slowly. "This does not make it approved storage." "No," Edna said. "It makes it cold." That was all she allowed herself. No smile. No triumph. Because while Harold was staring at the thermometer, Edna noticed something else. The forbidden stone on the north wall had shifted. Not much. Barely the width of a fingernail. But enough that a dark line showed where there had been none the night before. Someone had not only tried the lock, someone had known where to press. Edna waited until June and Calvin carried the last crate upstairs. Harold lingered near the doorway, writing notes with tight, angry strokes. When he turned to take a photograph of the vent shaft, Edna slipped one finger to the edge of the north stone. It moved. Her breath caught. Behind it was not empty space exactly, but a narrow pocket lined with old tin. Something rested inside, wrapped in waxed cloth, so dark with age it looked almost black. Edna heard Ruby's voice. "Leave that be." Then, from above, the school intercom crackled. A cafeteria aide's voice came thin and shaken through the hallway speaker. "Mrs. Mallory, we just got the test back. The chicken trays are unsafe. All of them." Children shouted in the distance, unaware. Harold froze. June closed her eyes. Calvin whispered, "God, help us." Edna kept her hand on the stone. For the first time, the whole modern system had failed in front of witnesses. And behind the wall, Ruby's secret waited, cold and patient, as if it had known this day would come. By 11:38, Briar Hollow Elementary had no lunch. The chicken salad trays were first to go, then the milk crates, then the fruit cups. After Harold's test strips came back wrong twice and right once, which was enough to make them wrong for children. The cafeteria staff moved through the kitchen in a stunned silence, pulling sealed trays from the line and stacking them into gray bins marked discard. 217 lunches, prepared somewhere far from Briar Hollow, printed with dates and safety codes, approved by a system that had looked perfect on paper until the mountain road, the failing truck unit, and 40 minutes of bad temperature exposed the weakness nobody had wanted to see. In the cafeteria, children sat at long tables, swinging their feet and asking why the line had stopped. June Mallory stood near the kitchen doorway with one hand pressed to her mouth. "We have crackers," one aide said. "Some apples, peanut butter, bread, emergency cartons." "Enough?" June asked. The aide looked away. "Not enough." Edna heard the answer without anyone saying it. Harold was on the phone with the county office, speaking in careful phrases that protected him from blame. Possible temperature abuse. Vendor review pending. Temporary disruption. No confirmed illness. He did not say children waiting. He did not say empty trays. He did not say that an old woman had warned them about trusting a system with no backup. Calvin stood by the loading door, staring at the bins of discarded food. Each tray made a flat sound when it landed. Plastic against plastic. Waste against shame. Wes Pritchard arrived at 11:47, moving fast through the back entrance with his company jacket half-zipped and his phone already in his hand. "This is being mishandled," he said before greeting anyone. "We need to isolate the affected product, not create panic." June turned on him. "Panic is not the problem. Lunch is. We can dispatch replacement trays." "From where?" "Charleston. That is 3 hours." Wes did not answer. A small boy appeared at the cafeteria doorway and asked, "Mrs. Mallory, are we still eating?" June's face changed. It was the change Edna had seen in Ruby's face years ago, when a child asked for seconds and there were only enough potatoes if the adults did not eat. June crouched and smiled with effort. "Yes, sweetheart, we're figuring it out." The boy nodded and went back to his table. When June stood, she looked at Edna, not at Harold, not at Wes. At Edna. "What can we do?" For one breath, no one spoke. Then Harold said, "We cannot serve anything from that cellar." Edna looked at him. Nobody asked to serve from the cellar. You're implying, I'm saying the cellar can hold what you still have while you get organized. And if the church pantry has sealed food, and Carter's Market can spare bread, and the farm stand still has apples, you can feed these children before the day is done. Wes gave a sharp laugh. This is not a church picnic. Edna turned toward him. No, she said. It is a school. That used to mean people did what had to be done. June made the decision. Call the church, she told an aide. Call Carter's. Call Mrs. Bell at the farm stand. Tell them we need sealed, safe, simple food now. Nothing cooked in private kitchens. Nothing unlabeled. We follow every rule we can still follow. Harold started to object. June cut him off. And you can document it. That was how the root cellar became part of the school again. Not officially, not proudly, not with permission written in clean language, but crate by crate, box by box, under the pressure of hungry children and spoiled trays, the old door opened. Edna moved like someone younger than herself. She directed shelves, spacing, airflow. She told Calvin to keep bread high. She told one cafeteria aide not to stack apples against the damp wall. She made June write down times, temperatures, and sources because she knew Harold would need paper before he could accept what his own eyes were seeing. All the while, the north wall waited. The shifted stone seemed darker now. The waxed cloth behind it had not moved, but Edna could feel it as if it were calling from the cold. At 12:26, the first emergency lunches went out. Apple slices, peanut butter sandwiches, crackers, shelf, stable milk, and small cups of peaches from the church pantry that still bore proper labels. It was not pretty. It was not the modern menu promised in the district brochure. But children ate. Some laughed again. That sound nearly broke Edna. Ruby had once said that a school did not become poor when it had simple food. It became poor when adults became too proud to feed children simply. When the last crate was settled and June had gone upstairs to calm parents, Edna returned to the north wall. Calvin followed her. So did Harold, though he pretended he was only checking the temperature again. What are you doing? Calvin asked. Edna touched the shifted stone. Finishing what your grandmother started. Calvin's face tightened. Mom, not now. Yes, Edna said. Now. Because somebody tried to open this before the county sealed it. That means someone knows there is something here. Harold lowered his clipboard. Edna pressed the edge of the stone. It moved inward, then tilted. Calvin reached out despite himself and caught it before it fell. Behind it, the narrow, tin-lined pocket breathed out a smell of wax, dust, and old paper. Inside lay the blackened bundle. Edna pulled it free with both hands. The waxed cloth cracked when she unfolded it. Beneath it was a ledger, smaller than a schoolbook, bound in brown coverboard, swollen slightly at the edges but dry. Across the front, written in Ruby's hand, were the words, Winter lunch count, 1,978. No one spoke. Edna opened the first page. At first, it looked like numbers, dates, meal counts, beans, bread, applesauce, potatoes, milk powder, children present, children absent, notes about snow days and shortages. Then came the names. Ruby Kessler, Alma Price, Jeanette Cole, Mavis Bell, Ruth Ann Dyer, Gladda Whitcomb, Nell Haskins. The list continued down the page. 26 women. Some names Edna knew from church dinners and old obituaries. Some belonged to women whose faces she could almost remember behind steam and hairnets. Some had initials beside them. Some had hours marked in pencil. Some had the word ode written so faintly it looked like a stain. June came down the steps and stopped halfway. What is that? Edna turned another page. There were columns. Hours worked before pay period. Food brought from home. Meals served during closure. Back pay promised. Pension credit pending. Harold whispered. That can't be district property. But he said it like fear, not law. Edna's finger stopped beside Ruby's name. There, written in a smaller hand, was a mark she had seen only once before, on the strip of tin. Signed. The word sat beside Ruby Kessler like a stone laid on a grave. Calvin leaned closer. Signed what? Edna could not answer. She turned the page. Folded between the sheets was a copy of an agreement, yellowed and thin. The top line read, Temporary Volunteer Service Acknowledgement. Under it were signatures. Ruby's was first. Edna's throat closed. Volunteer. Her mother had not volunteered. None of them had. They had worked before dawn, after hours, through snow, through shortages, through a winter the town had chosen to forget. Wes's voice came from the stairs. No one should be touching that. Everyone turned. He was standing near the cellar entrance, phone in hand, his smooth expression gone. "How did you know we found something?" June asked. Wes did not answer quickly enough, and in that small silence, the room changed. The spoiled trays upstairs had proved Edna right about the cellar, but the ledger in her hands proved something worse. The school had been fed once before by women whose work was called charity when payment became inconvenient. The root cellar had not only preserved food, it had preserved the names of the women who kept children from hunger, while the district wrote them out of the record. Edna looked again at Ruby's signature. For the first time, her mother's final words made terrible sense. Don't let them seal it shut. Not the cellar, not only the door, the names. By 3 o'clock, the ledger had become a problem everyone wanted to name differently. June Mallory called it evidence. Harold Vance called it an unauthorized historical document found in an unapproved food storage structure. Wes Pritchard called it unrelated material. Linda Caro, the district superintendent, called it district property before she had even seen it. Edna called it what Ruby had called it without using the word. The names. Linda arrived at Briar Hollow Elementary in a gray sedan with county plates and a face that looked prepared for cameras. She was a tall woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pinned neatly behind her ears and a wool coat too clean for the wet gravel behind the cafeteria. She did not come alone. A district attorney came with her, carrying a leather folder. So did a communications assistant who kept glancing at his phone. The children had eaten by then. That was the part Edna held on to. It had not been enough. Not the lunch the district had promised. But no child had gone through the whole day with nothing. Apples, sandwiches, crackers, peaches, milk cartons from the church pantry. Simple food. Safe food. Food that had reached their hands because the old cellar had held steady while everyone else debated what counted as acceptable. Now the adults had turned back to what they did best. Control. Linda stood in the community kitchen with the ledger on the metal table between them. Edna had wrapped it again in the waxed cloth, but she had not let it out of her sight. "This was found on district property," Linda said. "It was found behind a wall my mother kept locked for 50 years, Edna replied. "In a building owned by the district. In a cellar, the district forgot until it wanted to seal it." Linda's expression did not change. "Mrs. Kessler, I understand this is emotional." Edna almost smiled. That was the word people used when they wanted to make truth sound unstable. The attorney cleared his throat. "Until ownership and chain of custody are established, we recommend the ledger be surrendered to the district for secure review." "Secure," Edna said. "Yes. Like the lunch trays?" No one answered. Harold stood near the doorway, his citation folder tucked under one arm. He looked less certain than he had that morning, but uncertainty did not make him brave. Not yet. Wes leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, watching the ledger like it might crawl away. June stood beside Edna. That mattered. Not fully. Not enough to stop what was coming, but enough that Edna did not feel alone in the room. Linda turned to June. "Principal Mallory, you need to think carefully about your position. This school cannot operate on improvisation." June's face flushed. "Improvisation fed the students today. Improvisation also exposes the district to liability. So did the vendor." Wes straightened. "Blue Ridge Mealworks followed its reporting process." "Your reporting process delivered unsafe trays," June said. "Allegedly unsafe." Harold looked up. "The chicken trays failed." Wes turned on him. "You said further testing was pending." Harold opened his mouth, then closed it. Edna saw it then. The room was not divided between old and modern. It was divided between people willing to look directly at what had happened and people looking for language that would soften it. Linda placed one hand on the leather folder. "The district will conduct an internal review," she said. "Until then, the ledger remains confidential." Edna pulled the waxed bundle closer. "No." The word was quiet, but the room heard it. Linda's eyes hardened. "Mrs. Kessler." "No," Edna said again. 26 women already had their work made confidential. I won't help you do it twice." That was when Calvin appeared in the doorway. He looked as if he had been standing outside for a while. His company vest was gone. In his hand was a folded paper. "Calvin," Edna said. He would not meet her eyes. Wes saw the paper and said, This is not the time. Calvin gave a short laugh with no humor in it. It was the time when your dispatcher called me. The room turned. Calvin unfolded the paper. They suspended my route, he said. Pending review, conflict of interest. Edna felt the words hit before she understood them. Calvin. He shook his head. Don't. Please don't say you're sorry like that fixes anything. Wes stepped toward him. It's temporary. You told me to tell my mother to stop pushing, Calvin said. Yesterday. On the phone. You said if she kept making noise about the cellar, Blue Ridge might have to reevaluate whether I was a good fit. Wes's face went still. Linda looked at him sharply. June whispered, You threatened him? I reminded an employee of professional boundaries, Wes said. Calvin crumpled the paper in his fist. You reminded me my paycheck had a leash. For the first time all day, Edna wanted to sit down. This was the cost. Not a dramatic cost. Not one that belonged in speeches. A mortgage payment. A route. A son who had spent years trying not to depend on his mother, now losing work because she had refused to hand over a key. Linda used the silence. This is exactly why we need process, she said. Emotions are running high. Documents are being misinterpreted. Employment concerns are being mixed with student safety. Edna looked at Calvin. He still would not look back. The ledger sat between them like a living thing. Harold finally spoke. Superintendent Caro, I can't certify the cellar for use, but I also can't say it failed today. Everyone turned to him. He looked uncomfortable, as if honesty were a coat that did not fit him. My preliminary report will say the cellar maintained stable temperature during emergency holding of sealed, low-risk items, he said. It will also say the vendor delivery experienced a reportable temperature event. Wes's jaw tightened. Linda said, Harold, I suggest you wait until legal review. Harold swallowed. I write health reports. Legal can write legal reports. It was not courage enough to save them, but it was the first crack in him. The attorney slid a paper across the table toward Edna. This is a preservation notice, he said. You are instructed not to remove, copy, publish, damage, or transfer any document found on district property. Edna did not touch it. Does it say I have to give it to you? The attorney paused. Not at this time. Then I won't. Linda's eyes narrowed. You are making this harder than it needs to be. No, Edna said. I am making it harder to bury. That night, she did not take the ledger home. She did not trust her house. She did not trust the district. She did not trust Blue Ridge. She barely trusted herself, because one part of her still wanted to put the waxed cloth back into the wall and let the town go on thinking Ruby Kessler had been only good, only kind, only wronged. Instead, June locked the ledger in the school safe and wrote a receipt by hand. Edna kept the brass key to the cellar. Harold kept a copy of his temperature reading. Calvin left without speaking to anyone, and Wes Pritchard stood in the parking lot making a phone call under the yellow security light. Edna could not hear the words, but she saw the way he looked toward the cellar door. Not angry, afraid. The next morning, Edna went to find Marjorie Delaney. Marjorie lived 3 miles outside Briar Hollow in a white trailer behind a collapsed apple shed. She had been the district payroll clerk in 1978. She was 91 now, thin as kindling, with eyes that still looked too sharp for the body holding them. When Edna stepped onto the porch, Marjorie opened the door before she knocked. I wondered when Ruby's girl would come, Marjorie said. Edna's mouth went dry. You knew about the ledger. Marjorie looked past her toward the road. I knew about the winter. Edna took out a folded copy June had made of the first ledger page. Not the whole book, just the names. Marjorie's hand trembled when she saw them. For a moment, her face folded inward, all the years collapsing at once. Then she touched Ruby's name. She should have burned that thing, Marjorie whispered. Edna felt something cold pass through her. My mother saved it. Marjorie closed her eyes. Your mother saved children, she said, and she signed away the women who helped her do it. Edna stepped back as if the porch had moved. What does that mean? Marjorie looked at her for a long time before answering. It means, she said, you don't know yet what kind of promise you're carrying. Marjorie Delaney did not invite Edna inside right away. She stood in the doorway of the trailer with one hand on the frame, as if the truth were something that might rush past her if she opened the door too wide. Behind her, the little living room was dim, warmed by an electric heater and the smell of tea gone cold. You came too late, Marjorie said. Edna held the copy of the ledger page against her coat. I came when I knew there was something to come for. Marjorie looked at Ruby's name again. For a moment, the old woman's sharpness disappeared, and Edna saw only exhaustion. Not the kind that came from age, the kind that came from carrying the same winter for almost 50 years. Finally, Marjorie stepped aside. Inside, every surface seemed to hold paper. Church bulletins, medical envelopes, old tax folders, a calendar from 3 years ago still hanging on the wall. Edna sat on a faded sofa, while Marjorie lowered herself into a chair by the heater. 1978 was not just a bad winter, Marjorie said. People say that because it sounds clean, bad weather, hard roads, short supplies, but that wasn't the whole of it. She folded her hands. The district was broke. Not officially. Officially, there were delays, adjustments, temporary budget constraints, words like that. But the lunch program had no money left by January. The supplier stopped extending credit. The freezer failed twice. The school board kept promising checks that did not come. Edna pictured Ruby before dawn, tying her apron in the kitchen dark. The children still came, Marjorie said. Hungry children do not wait for budget meetings. Ruby and the other women had done what women like them were always expected to do. They stretched beans with potatoes, cut bruises from apples, brought jars from home, used church flour, took cabbage from gardens buried under straw. They worked before their paid hours and after them. Some nights they stayed to can food in the community kitchen while snow covered the road outside. They were not volunteers, Marjorie said. No matter what that paper says. Edna's fingers tightened. Then, why did my mother sign it? Marjorie looked toward the window. Because the board cornered her. The story came slowly after that. Not like confession, but like something being dug out of frozen ground. By February, 26 women had kept the school lunch program alive for 6 weeks. They logged hours. Ruby logged everything. Meals served, food brought, children fed. Who worked which shift, what was owed. She made Marjorie copy payroll notes because Ruby did not trust verbal promises. She was right not to trust them, Marjorie said. Then the emergency state funds arrived. Enough to reimburse the district. Enough to cover food. Enough, if properly reported, to pay the women for the work already done and credit their pension hours. But the district had a problem. If they admitted the women had worked unpaid hours for weeks, they had to admit they had let the lunch program run illegally. They had to admit administrators had filed reports claiming normal operations while kitchen staff were holding the place together with home-canned food and borrowed flour. They had to admit children had been fed because poor women broke themselves quietly while men in offices waited for money. So they changed the story. Temporary volunteer service. Community emergency assistance. No back pay required. No pension credit accrued. No liability admitted. Edna stared at the floor, but Ruby signed first. Yes, Marjorie said. Why? The heater clicked. The room fell into a thin silence. Because Mr. Caro told her he would close the kitchen immediately if she didn't. Edna looked up. Caro? Linda Caro's father, Marjorie said. Frank Caro. He was board chairman then. The name settled between them like another hidden stone. He told Ruby the district could survive a scandal better than it could survive an audit. If she refused to sign, he would shut down the lunch program until spring, blame health concerns, and let the churches handle whatever they could. He knew what that meant. Ruby knew too. Children with no lunch, mothers with no cars, snow on the roads, church pantries already thin. Ruby asked what would happen to the other women, Marjorie said. He said if they signed, the district would keep them on the schedule. If they fought, they could all be replaced when the kitchen reopened. That was illegal, Edna whispered. A great many things are illegal after someone finally writes them down. Marjorie's voice cracked on that. Edna thought of the word beside Ruby's name. Signed. Not cowardice. Not exactly. Not innocence either. Ruby had chosen the children who needed lunch that week over the women who deserved justice for the weeks before. She had protected tomorrow by sacrificing yesterday. And because Ruby signed first, others followed. Some trusted her. Some were afraid. Some never forgave her. Marjorie reached toward the side table and opened a small metal box. From it, she took 3 folded papers. I kept copies, she said. Not enough. Never enough. But some. The first was a payroll memo with the words volunteer adjustment typed near the bottom. The second was a list of pension hours denied. The third was a letter from Alma Price, one of the names in the ledger. Edna read only part before her eyes blurred. Mrs. Kessler said the children had to eat. I know that. I helped feed them. But my husband says ours are ours. And if they erase these, what else will they erase from us? Marjorie looked away. Alma lost her house 2 years later, she said. Not only because of that. Life is never only one thing. But those wages would have caught up the winter bill. She tapped the second paper. Jeanette Cole never got enough pension credit. Her daughter took her in after her stroke. Mavis Bell's boys grew up hearing their mother had only helped out at school, as if she had not worked nights with cracked hands. Nell Haskins died angry. Ruth Ann Dyer stopped coming to church dinners because she could not stand seeing Ruby thanked. Edna closed her eyes. 3 consequences were not enough. There were 26. And Ruby was threaded through all of them. My mother kept the ledger, Edna said. Yes. Why not give it back? Why not fix it? Marjorie's face twisted. Because she was ashamed. Because Frank Caro stayed powerful. Because the women scattered into sickness, work, pride, silence. Because every year it got harder to say what should have been said the first week. And you? The question left Edna before she could soften it. Marjorie accepted it. I typed what they told me to type, she said. Then I watched women disappear from records I knew they had earned. I told myself I was young. I told myself I had children. I told myself Ruby had signed. So who was I to fight harder than she did? Her eyes filled. Those are explanations, not excuses. Edna sat very still. All her life, she had wanted her mother to become simpler after death. Good, strong, wronged, worth defending. But the truth did not let Ruby stay simple. Ruby had saved children. Ruby had hurt women. Ruby had kept proof. Ruby had passed the burden to a daughter who once walked ahead of her in shame. Marjorie pushed the 3 papers across the table. The ledger is not yours, she said. It is not the district's either. Edna looked at her. It belongs to the families whose names were turned into volunteer work. Outside, a car passed slowly on the gravel road. For one frightened second, Edna thought of Wes Pritchard, Linda Caro, Harold's citation, the district attorney's preservation notice, Calvin's suspended route. Then she thought of Alma Price losing her house, Jeanette Cole losing pension credit, Mavis Bell's children not knowing the truth of their mother's labor. She folded the copies carefully. What happens if I give it to them? Marjorie's answer came without mercy. You may lose the cellar. Your son may lose his job. Linda Caro will fight because her father's name is in it. The district will say you damaged trust in the school. Some families will thank you. Some will wish you had left their grief alone. Edna stood. The room felt smaller than when she entered. At the door, Marjorie called her name. When Edna turned, the old woman's face had lost its sharpness again. Ruby was not a bad woman, Marjorie said. Edna nodded slowly. No, she said, but good women can still leave debts. She stepped out into the cold afternoon with the copies inside her coat. For the first time since Ruby died, Edna understood the promise. Don't let them seal it shut did not mean protect the door. It meant open it wide enough that the names could leave. Edna did not choose the school board room. She did not choose the courthouse either. Those rooms had tables too long, microphones too cold, and walls that made ordinary people feel like they needed permission to remember their own lives. She chose the old community kitchen. By 6 o'clock that evening, the place smelled faintly of coffee, dust, and apples from the crates still stored below. June Mallory opened the side door herself. She had changed out of her school blazer into a plain cardigan, but her face still carried the strain of the day. Calvin arrived next. He came without his Blue Ridge vest. For a moment, he stood in the doorway like a man unsure whether he had the right to enter. Edna saw the folded suspension notice still in his coat pocket. She also saw that he had shaved, badly, leaving a small nick under his chin the way he used to as a teenager before school pictures. I didn't know if you wanted me here, he said. Edna wanted to say 100 things. That she was sorry. That she was angry. That she had been frightened when he stood against her at the meeting. That she knew a job was not just a job when bills waited on the kitchen table. Instead, she said, there are names that need reading. I don't think I can read all of them alone. Calvin looked at her then. The room shifted. Not healed. Not yet, but shifted. Harold Vance came with a manila folder tucked under his arm. He did not wear the tan county jacket. Without it, he looked less like a seal of authority and more like a tired man who had slept badly after hearing himself too clearly. Linda Caro arrived 10 minutes later with the district attorney. Her mouth was set in a careful line. She nodded to June, ignored Calvin, and looked at Edna as if trying to decide whether this gathering was a meeting, a threat, or a mistake. Behind her came 3 families Edna had called after leaving Marjorie's trailer. Alma Price's grandson, Leon, a heavy-set man with mechanic's hands. Jeanette Cole's daughter, Sarah, who walked with a cane and carried a folder of her mother's old disability papers. Mavis Bell's youngest son, Thomas, who had not stepped inside the community kitchen since his mother died. Marjorie Delaney did not come. She sent a letter. June placed a folding table in the center of the room. On it lay the ledger, Ruby's brass key, Harold's temperature report, Marjorie's copied documents, and a yellow legal pad where June had written, 26 women, Winter 1978. Lunch program audit. No one sat at first. Then Edna unfolded the waxed cloth. Linda spoke immediately. Mrs. Kessler, before anything is read aloud, the district needs to state that these materials have not been authenticated. Sarah Cole tapped her cane once against the floor. My mother's pension denial is authentic. Linda's face tightened. The district attorney leaned toward her, but Linda lifted one hand to stop him. Harold opened his folder. I inspected the cellar today, he said, voice rough. My preliminary citation remains pending, but I am amending the report. Edna looked at him. Harold did not meet her eyes yet. The cellar maintained 39 to 43 degrees during observation, he continued. It was used only for sealed, low-risk emergency items under supervision. The vendor delivery experienced a reportable temperature failure. That failure contributed to the disposal of prepared student meals. Wes Pritchard was not in the room. His absence said enough. Linda said, That does not certify the cellar. No, Harold said. It corrects the record. The words were small, but for Harold, they cost something. Then Calvin stepped forward. Edna handed him the ledger. His hands were not steady. He opened to the page where the names began. For a moment, he looked like he might ask his mother to do it after all. Then he drew a breath. Ruby Kessler, he read. Edna closed her eyes. Alma Price, Jeanette Cole, Mavis Bell, Ruth Ann Dyer, Clara Whitcomb, Nell Haskins, Beatrice Moore, Lottie Granger, Evelyn Pike, Mary Jo Bell, Agnes Cartwright. Name by name, the kitchen changed. The room did not become dramatic. No music swelled. No one fell to their knees. But people who had walked in carrying arguments began to carry faces instead. Leon Price took off his cap. Sarah Cole pressed 2 fingers to her mouth. Thomas Bell looked at the old stove and whispered, Mama never said there were that many. Calvin kept reading. When he finished the 26th name, his voice broke. He looked at Edna. I'm sorry. Not loudly. Not for the room. For here. Edna nodded once. I am too, she said. Linda Caro stood very still beside the table. Her eyes had not left the copied agreement bearing Frank Caro's name. My father was board chairman, she said. No one answered. I was 12 in 1978. Still no one answered. It was not a defense. Not enough to be one. But for the first time, Linda did not sound like a superintendent. She sounded like a daughter standing too close to a family name. Edna picked up Marjorie's letter. She asked me to read this. The paper trembled slightly in her hand. Marjorie had written only 1 page. She did not ask forgiveness. She did not soften herself. She wrote that she had typed the volunteer acknowledgments. She wrote that she knew the women had worked hours they were never paid for. She wrote that Ruby had signed first after Frank Caro threatened to close the kitchen, and that Marjorie had let the record lie because every year of silence made telling the truth feel more dangerous. At the bottom, she had written, I do not deserve to be remembered kindly for telling this late. But the women deserve to be remembered accurately. When Edna finished, Linda sat down. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. What do you want? Linda asked. It was not a generous question. It was not even soft. But it was the first honest one. Edna looked at the families. This ledger does not belong to the district, she said, and it does not belong to me. The attorney straightened. Legally, that is not established. Morally, it is. Edna placed 3 copied packets on the table. 1 copy goes to the families represented here tonight. 1 to an independent labor attorney June contacted. 1 to the county archive, sealed only against damage, not against access. Linda looked at June. June did not look away. And the original? the attorney asked. Edna touched the waxed cloth. The original stays in protective custody until the families decide together who holds it. Not the district alone. Linda's jaw worked. For a moment, Edna thought she would refuse. Then, Sarah Cole opened her folder and laid out her mother's pension denial. Leon Price added Alma's unpaid winter utility notice, preserved by chance in a family Bible. Thomas Bell placed a photograph of Mavis in a cafeteria apron, standing beside Ruby near the old stove. The district attorney looked at Linda. This was no longer one old woman with one old book. It was a room full of paper, a room full of descendants, a room full of names, Linda said, quietly. The district will open an independent audit. Calvin exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for an hour. Harold removed the closure notice from his folder and placed it on the table. I can't approve the cellar as it stands, he said to Edna, but I'm withdrawing the immediate seal order. It needs repairs, testing, proper barriers, documentation. Edna looked at him. Harold swallowed. And an apology, he said. The room waited. He looked down at the old brass key. What I said this morning was cruel, he said. And ignorant. I saw an old door and called it poverty. I should have asked what it had kept alive. Edna did not forgive him out loud. Forgiveness was not a ribbon to tie around a day like that. But she nodded. It was enough for the moment. Before they left, June unlocked the door to the cellar. Not for storage, not for evidence. Just so the families could see the place where the ledger had waited. They went down slowly. Leon touched the stone shelf. Sarah stood by the north wall. Thomas Bell looked at the pencil marks and said, Mama's hands were here. Edna stood on the steps with Calvin beside her. For the first time all day, he reached for her hand. She let him take it. Above them, the kitchen lights hummed. Below them, the cellar held its cold, but it was no longer holding the names alone. 6 months later, the root cellar door opened without shame. It did not look new. That was the first thing Edna had insisted on. The county wanted a metal security door. The district wanted warning signs large enough to make the place look dangerous even after it had passed inspection. Harold Vance, now quieter in meetings, suggested a compromise. Repair what needed repairing, document what needed documenting, but do not erase the thing itself in the name of saving it. So the old wooden door remained. Its hinges were replaced. Its frame was reinforced. A small temperature monitor sat inside now, not blinking proudly, not pretending to be the reason the cellar worked, but recording what the stone had known how to do for generations. The vent shaft was cleaned and screened. The floor channel was cleared. The stone shelves were washed, sealed where necessary, and labeled in June Mallory's careful handwriting. Apples, dry goods, emergency shelf-stable milk, root vegetables. Do not block airflow. Harold's new inspection report did not call it poverty. It called it an approved emergency food resilience space. Edna thought Ruby would have laughed at that. Not cruelly. Just the way women laugh when officials finally invent expensive words for work poor people have been doing correctly for 100 years. The audit took longer. Audits always did. At first, the district tried to call the 1978 records incomplete. Then, more papers surfaced. Sarah Cole found old letters in a shoebox. Leon Price brought utility bills and a note from Alma. Thomas Bell found 2 photographs of Mavis in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, standing beside a wall calendar from February 1978. Marjorie Delaney gave a sworn statement from her living room, wrapped in a quilt, her voice thin but steady. Blue Ridge Mealworks lost the school contract before Christmas. Calvin did not get his route back. For 3 weeks, that sat between him and Edna like a cold plate neither one wanted to touch. Then June called him. Briar Hollow Elementary needed someone to manage deliveries, emergency pantry stock, local farm pickups, and cellar documentation. It paid less at first. It came with fewer polished promises, but it was honest work, close to home, and no one could suspend him for telling the truth about a truck alarm. He took the job. The first morning, Edna found him in the cellar with a clipboard, frowning at the west shelf. You stacked the apples too tight, she said. He turned. I followed the spacing guide. You followed the minimum spacing guide. He stared at the crates, then at her. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. Ruby would have said that. Ruby would have moved them already. So they moved the apples together. The settlement came in spring, though no one in Briar Hollow called it justice. Justice would have arrived in 1978. Justice would have paid women when their hands were still cracked from the work. Justice would have given pension credit before illness, before foreclosure, before daughters took mothers into spare bedrooms, before sons grew up thinking their mothers had merely helped out. What came in spring was money, admission, correction, and a public record. It was not enough, but it was something that could be used. Edna refused the district's first proposal for the fund name. Ruby Kessler Emergency Lunch Fund sounded kind. It sounded clean. It sounded like the kind of half-truth towns prefer because it gives them one good woman to praise and 25 others to forget. Edna sent the paperwork back with one sentence written across the top. All the names, or none. 3 weeks later, the brass plaque arrived. Not for a museum wall. For the inside of the community kitchen, beside the stairway leading down to the cellar. The Briar Hollow Lunch Fund, in honor of the women who fed the children through the winter of 1978, Ruby Kessler, Alma Price, Jeanette Cole, Mavis Bell, Ruth Ann Dyer, Clara Whitcomb, Nell Haskins, Beatrice Moore, Lottie Granger, Evelyn Pike, Mary Jo Bell, Agnes Cartwright. 26 names. Small letters. Plain brass. No speech carved underneath. The names were enough. On the day the fund opened, no one held a ceremony with a stage. June did not want cameras. The families did not want speeches. Edna did not want anyone turning pain into a performance. Instead, the 5th grade class came down in groups of 6. Harold stood at the cellar entrance, teaching them how to read the temperature log. Calvin showed them how not to block the airflow. June explained why backup systems mattered, and why modern safety did not mean laughing at old knowledge before understanding it. Edna stood by the north wall. The stone that had hidden the ledger was back in place, but not sealed the same way. A small outline showed where it could be removed if needed. Not a secret anymore. A reminder. A girl named Lila Price raised her hand. She was Leon's granddaughter, with 2 tight braids and serious eyes. Alma Price had been her great-great-grandmother. Mrs. Kessler, Lila asked, did your mother know people would find it? Edna looked at the wall. Then at the girl. I think she hoped someone would, she said. But I think she was afraid of what it would cost. Lila considered that. Was she brave? The question was simple only to a child. Edna took a long breath. Yes, she said. And she was wrong. Sometimes people are both. The class went quiet. That, Edna thought, was better than a speech. When the lesson ended, Calvin brought out Ruby's brass key. It had been cleaned but not polished. Edna had refused to make it shine like something that had never passed through fear. He placed it in her hand. You sure? He asked. Edna closed her fingers around it once. For 26 years, she had thought keeping the key meant keeping a door shut against the world. Now she understood. A key was not loyalty to a lock. A key was responsibility for what opened. She called Lila Price back. The girl came slowly, looking from Edna to Calvin to the cellar door. This doesn't mean the cellar is yours, Edna said. It means the story is partly yours to carry. Yours and every family on that wall. Lila held out both hands. Edna placed the brass key across her palms. It looked too large there. Then again, the truth usually did when it first reached the young. Upstairs, the school bell rang for lunch. Not an emergency lunch this time. Not crackers passed out under pressure. Real food. Warm food. And below it, in the old cellar, apples waited on the west shelf, bread sat high and dry, and the cold mountain air moved through the vent the way it always had. Quiet. Patient. No longer hiding the names, only keeping tomorrow from going hungry.